Aleppo ablaze amid some of the heaviest bombing in months as Russia and America sit down again to try to forge a new ceasefire. Good evening. Syria's President Assad has used the stalemate at the United Nations in New York to intensify attacks on rebel-held Aleppo. A people who had hoped for food and medicine as a consequence of last week's ceasefire are instead tonight receiving one of the heaviest periods of bombing and shelling since the war began. Tonight, as the international community struggles to try again for a ceasefire, we have an interview with Britain's Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson.
Also tonight, a state of emergency in North Carolina after a second night of unrest following the fatal shooting of a black man by US police officers. Race is turning out to play an ugly and potentially decisive role in this bitter election. Plus, amid the tightening of the presidential race in the United States, we are in Florida tonight in the biggest retirement community in America, mostly white, mostly pro-Trump. And is the Great British Bake Off without Mary Berry like a victorious sponge without the jam? In the on-air cake wars, Mary Queen of Bakes stays loyal to Auntie. Has Channel 4 souffle just collapsed?
Saudi Arabia sells us oil, we sell them arms and police know-how. The College of Policing prides itself on teaching its skills to their Saudi colleagues. But should checks be made on how these skills are then used? Right now, in New York, the international players backing the peace process in Syria are sitting down once again to discuss salvaging the ceasefire. As they talk, the people of Aleppo are enduring the heaviest bombardment in months, with dozens of deaths reported. Russia and the Syrian government have spurned US pleas to ground all flights. In an interview, Syria's President Bashar al-Assad claimed he bears no responsibility for the hundreds of thousands of people killed during the 6 years of civil war, and said that the conflict was likely to drag on because the US is not interested in peace. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, has this report.
And so the great Syrian ceasefire dies in the flames of Aleppo. Flames, residents say, caused by phosphorus bombs. Observers say overnight at least 45 civilians were killed there, trapped by the siege with no food or medical aid getting through. Ismail Al-Abdullah is an English teacher there.
Living in Aleppo City is like hell. Today, according to civil defense sources, 20 barrel bombs hit Aleppo City and 8 airstrikes. We are suffering of lack of medicine, lack of doctors, actually everything. Did you hear the airstrike?
Yes, I heard the explosion.
So yet more civilians and children buried by what these locals in East Aleppo insisted were airstrikes and barrel bombs from the Syrian government forces or Russian forces or both. If so, then this is what rejecting the American plea for a no-fly zone here looks like on the ground.
A helicopter released a barrel bomb on this civilian building. So far, we rescued 2 fatally injured children and a man who suffered an injury to his leg. There is an elderly man that we're attempting to rescue at the moment.
2 bloody events mark the epitaph for this dead ceasefire. The American-led coalition repeatedly bombing a Syrian army base at Deir ez-Zor, killing at least 60 soldiers, and then this. Newly released video from an anti-Assad group claiming to show the bombing of the aid convoy near Aleppo. America and Britain insisting Russia did it. The blame game intensifies. The rhetoric, particularly from America, ever more emotional. Leaving Syria's president, backed by Russia and Iran, saying the Americans do not want peace.
Well, the United States doesn't have the will to work against al-Nusra or even ISIS, because they believe that this is a card they can use for their own agenda. And if they attack al-Nusra or ISIS, they will lose very important card regarding the situation in Syria. So I don't believe the United States will be ready to join Russia in fighting terrorists in Syria.
In his words, it will all grind on. And on that, at least, President Assad seems correct. The UN said today it's desperate to resume aid convoys across Syria in coming days, and today did in fact succeed in getting one such convoy into the besieged town of Madamir. Meanwhile, in Homs, injured civilians, fighters and refugees were evacuated safely from the last rebel-held area of the city. Small successes in all the cynicism, blame and blood.
Alex Thompson reporting. Well, now in his first interview with this programme as Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson has accused the Russians of being guilty of needlessly protracting the Syrian conflict. He said the puppeteers for what he called a proxy war were principally in the Kremlin. He also said nobody had raised the issue of Brexit with him at the United Nations, where the UK plays a global role, he says. Mr. Johnson was talking to our Foreign Affairs correspondent, Jonathan Rugman, in New York.
First of all, on Syria, we've witnessed the worst bombing of Aleppo in many months. Are you not tempted to tell the Russians to their face that they are involved in war crimes and that their ambassador should go home?
Well, I think that there's no question at all that the Russians are guilty of protracting needlessly this conflict, in the sense that they continue to be the sponsors of a regime that over the last 5 years of this war is responsible for the overwhelming majority.
But you won't use the phrase
deaths.
war crimes.
I think that there are particular reasons why at this stage, because of the evidence that we have or don't have, that going down that particular route is difficult at the moment. But what is absolutely clear is that the Russians bear the moral responsibility for what is taking place, because you've got aid convoys with UN markings on them being targeted. You've got medical facilities being blown up.
But you've also got what looks like talking for the sake of talking.
And correct, that's what it looks like. And I perfectly understand the impatience and the fury of people looking at what is going on here, because they will say, they will rightly say, this is not a civil war, this is a proxy war. This is a war being conducted by puppeteers, and those puppeteers are principally in the Kremlin. They have the opportunity to bring an end to this. They could tell the Assad regime not to fly, not to bomb, to engage with the whole negotiations, get the Mistura process, the UN negotiator process back on the track in Geneva. That is an option open to them. I believe that's what the Russians should do. But if instead, I'm afraid you're seeing a cynical and barbaric protraction of violence, and it is tragic.
The UK has also been accused of complicity in war crimes in Yemen. Over £3 billion worth of British arms sold since the Saudi-led offensive began. Some MPs have written to you and said they want you to back an independent UN-sanctioned inquiry because the Saudi inquiry into what has gone on there is not good enough.
Well, what is certainly the case is that we are concerned by, as you know, there's been a recent bombing in which it looks like 19 civilians have lost their lives, some of them children. Of course, we're deeply concerned by that, and you're right, frankly, to draw attention to the arms.
So why not put yourself behind an inquiry under UN auspices?
Because what we are doing is using a very, very wide variety of information sources about what is happening to acquaint ourselves with the details.
But you're getting most of your information from the Saudis. And here we are at the UN, and you're not prepared to say there should be an inquiry under UN auspices.
Well, I don't happen to think that is the way forward. We don't, at the current, as things stand at the moment, I'm not going to hide my concern about this, because I am concerned about it. But as things stand at the moment, we don't think there are breaches of international humanitarian law. And I think it's a great mistake to try and, as I think you may be doing, to try and draw some equivalence between what is happening in Yemen with what is happening in Syria. The two things are really very different.
I wanted to ask you about your transition to being Britain's top diplomat. Were you in the room when the Prime Minister met President Erdogan of Turkey this week?
I was having other engagements, but I gather it was a very good meeting.
It was rather lucky that you weren't there, I would have thought, given that you wrote that scandalous poem about him. I mean,
Well, look,
I just wondered whether you feel you're walking on eggshells when you're dealing with countries like Turkey, which are very important.
Let me tell you an interesting thing about all that sort of stuff. What's so fascinating, I mean, two points. Nobody in the course of the last few days, certainly the last few weeks, has raised anything except how they want Britain to engage with them and with helping them to solve their problems. I think what people don't understand...
So you've got no nervousness about going to Ankara, given what you've said?
I have family in Ankara. What people don't understand is that Britain... I think people in our country really don't understand how much people around the world in the UN want us to engage with them.
So they want you to succeed, is what they want to forget your past as sort of saying whatever you want.
I think they want Britain to be. They want Britain to be there. They want a global Britain that is actively engaged with the world, and they're seeing it.
I see your fellow Foreign Minister, Alan Duncan, has been quoted as saying, in fact he did say, he thought you never actually believed in Brexit and that you were just positioning yourself, hoping that the referendum would fail, so that you might become Prime Minister.
I think what's fascinating about being here is that, the second point, is how few people actually want to discuss Brexit. They want to discuss what Britain is doing around the world. But on Brexit, there is no doubt at all in my mind, and what I campaign for and what I believe in, is an opportunity to get out from under the I think the unnecessary burdens of
So
the
no
European
fisticuffs with Alan
treaties.
Duncan back in the Foreign Office?
Get out from under the burdens of the European Union treaties and do a global free trade deal.
Foreign Secretary, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you.
Now, with just weeks to go until the US presidential election, the issue of race has once again exploded. In North Carolina, at least 9 people were injured and 44 arrested during a second night of violent protests in Charlotte. Demonstrations sparked by the fatal police shooting of a black man turned violent. Now a state of emergency has been declared. The family of Keith Lamont Scott, who was shot dead, said that he was holding a book. The police say he had a gun. America prides itself on being a melting pot, but when it comes to race and politics, it looks more like an archipelago of rival tribes. In a moment, we'll be in a largely white, Trump-supporting retirement community in Florida, the state that every presidential candidate needs to win. But first, to that other crucial and deeply troubled state, North Carolina. In America's year of living angrily, a familiar scene, but this time in a different state. Charlotte, North Carolina. This usually genteel southern city, America's second banking capital, now pungent with tear gas and rage.
You okay? Cover your eyes, cover your eyes. We want to be able to walk the streets of our own neighborhoods that we pay good tax dollars for in peace, knowing that our children are going to come home safe, knowing that our husbands are going to come home safe, knowing that we're going to come home safe.
We matter.
I want to shoot.
All of us. I still love you.
But love is in very short supply. For the second night in a row, they came to protest the death of a black man by a police officer.
Don't shoot!
Keith Lamont Scott shot dead while apparently waiting to collect his son from a local school bus, as he did every day. According to police sources, the officer was also black. The governor of North Carolina has deployed armored vehicles and declared a state of emergency. And much of the controversy centers on the exact events leading up to Scott's death. The police said that he got out of his car holding a gun. Eyewitnesses say it was a book.
When the gentleman got out his car to ask the police what was the problem, he got out his car, he walked to the back of his truck, because that's where he got killed at, in the back of his truck. He walked like this, the book fell off his lap, and he asked them what was the problem.
Since so much the police does these days in America is filmed by a dash cam, where is the tape from this one? That was the question confronting Charlotte's chief of police today.
We release it when we believe it is a compelling reason, but I'm not going to jeopardize the investigation. And right now, even though we're investigating, we probably won't be long term, because a request has also been made that an objective party, the SBI, move forward in the investigation.
Charlotte today.
The time is now. Let's get on the boat.
Charlotte 4 years ago. This place is racially mixed and politically divided. North Carolina is a crucial swing state. That's why the Democrats chose it to host their convention 4 years ago. That's why Donald Trump keeps showing up here. He organized rallies in the state on Tuesday, hoping to persuade African Americans to dislike him less.
The schools are failing, the jobs are leaving, and millions are trapped in poverty. So to the African American community, I say, vote for Donald Trump. I will fix it. I will fix it.
But the audience is all white, just like Trump's support in the polls. When the country's first black president was elected in 2008 by black and white, many dared to hope that America's original sin of racism could be absolved. But the brew of color, guns, and distrust has become more and not less toxic. And in this bitter election year, race does play a part, an ugly and potentially decisive one. Now, a few hundred miles south to Florida, a state which could well decide whether Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton is the next US president. Two communities could tip the scales in the all-important state. Newly registered Hispanic voters likely to support Clinton, and retirees who relocate south for the sunshine and favor Trump. Our correspondent Kylie Morris has been to the Villages in Central Florida, the country's largest retirement community, and found a wellspring of older voters who think they know how to make America great again. And a warning, this report does contain some strong language.
To AM 640 WVLD.
It's just a few thin high clouds out there. The sun's coming up. Another great day here in the Villages.
For nearly 100,000 retirees, this place is paradise found. In the Villages, you wake up to a round of golf, a walk by the lake, day after sunny day after sunny day. The fast track has a 30-mile speed limit, and you can pimp your golf cart in any heritage style you like.
We call it Disneyland for old people.
And for residents like Bill, the fantasy candidate who'll make their dreams come true this presidential election is Donald Trump.
People that I know are looking for a candidate that is not a politician. He is not a politician.
Doesn't that make him more risky? Doesn't that make him more
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think he's very well versed on how to handle himself, even though sometimes he gets a little carried away.
Choose immigrants based on merit, quickly removing the most dangerous criminal illegal immigrants in America who have evaded justice, just like Hillary Clinton has evaded justice. Maybe they'll be able to deport her.
He's made a vow that he's going to tell everybody the truth about any subject.
I mean, is there anything that he could say that would make you think that now you've lost my vote?
No, not at this particular point in time. No.
What Trump has already said about Hispanic judges or Muslim refugees or women seems lost in the summer haze of the Potomac Court.
I just think that he's a better person all the way around. I just do. I think he's honest. Oh, he tells his little lies as well, but I'm not going to give a vote to Hillary.
I'm getting agitated talking about it. Yeah. Exactly.
Back on our golf cart tour, Bill and I are working through his anger at Hillary Clinton and the sign he's made for the front of his cart.
Do you think it's been an ugly presidential campaign this time around?
Yes, it's going to get worse.
So it brings me back to this sign on the front of your car, I'm afraid. I mean, isn't that playing into the ugliness of it?
No, I don't think so. Can I say the word?
Yeah.
It's bitch.
It's just
a play. It's a play on words as much as anything.
Well, not really. I mean, as a woman, I do find it a bit offensive. I'm going to say.
I'm sorry.
I mean, you wouldn't call a man that term. She's corrupt, or she's a criminal, or she's a liar. All of those things I understand.
So what's different in calling you a liar than as a bitch?
Because a bitch is kind of an offensive term toward women.
I don't see that, but I'm not a woman, so.
That evening, there's a ghostly visitation. A stern-looking Donald Trump circling the villages, pumping up the locals.
This is the Trump train, baby. Everybody's jumping on the Trump train.
Like moths to the flame, retirees are drawn in by the monster truck visiting the square to smile.
Yes, sir. You want one too?
And hand out promotional material for the Republican candidate.
You want one? They're going to check that out.
We'll take one. It's driven by Trump disciple Brett.
I had the opportunity to meet him in person, and it was just like a revitalization of my mind. And to be able to be in his presence was awe.
What makes him right for America now?
He's a showman. He's no filter, but that's what we want.
Come morning and the monster truck has left town, the residents diverted by another perfect day, giving their all to win again, dragon boat style.
Everybody, we paddle together.
Now. Speaking to Trump supporters, it's as though here they found the America that he's talking about, that he's promising. I mean, it's predominantly white, it's predominantly conservative, and it's the kind of place where people who've worked hard their whole lives can kind of Zumba away the decades without being too troubled by the messy realities of modern America. But if you look hard enough, you might spy a Democrat determined to spoil their fun. Who is going to vote for Trump? Hey. Oh, with a cheer. Who's going to vote for Clinton? Yay! And who hasn't made up their mind yet and is still to be convinced? So still all to play for. Were you surprised by how many undecideds were on that vote?
They're not undecided. In this community, they're going to lean towards Trump.
How tricky is it to be a Democrat in the villages?
Well, it's difficult when you ride around and you see all these Trump signs and you know that if you make a statement about Hillary, they don't want to hear it.
What are your reasons for supporting Hillary?
I feel most politicians are somewhat crooked, and so I'm picking the one who I feel is the least crooked. I think she's done a lot of good things. I think Trump is crazy, and I wouldn't want him ever in the White House.
And when the election comes on November 8th, and it's as close as the polls predict, Florida will matter. And the voters here could well set the course. Kylie Morris, Channel 4 News, The Villages.
Well, we're now joined from South Carolina by the Republican pastor Mark Burns. Pastor Burns, thanks for coming on the program. Now, I've seen you support Donald Trump. I've seen you speak at his rallies with a lot of passion. You must feel very lonely as an African-American in the Trump camp.
Well, you know, I actually don't feel very lonely because the fact of the matter is there are more African Americans that are silently supporting Donald Trump than you really know. I mean, I believe come November, America really will be shocked to see the amount of support that Donald Trump has garnered from the African American community. So, no, I don't feel lonely at all. This is just part of the fight. Somebody has to speak up and to have a message of unity and not a message of division. We really here in America got to get back to the spirit of unity, and we have to break this strong racial division that is rebirthing itself. This is almost like what took place in the 60s with Martin Luther King and Bull Connor in Montgomery, Alabama, and Mississippi. This is not the American dream Dr. King spoke of when he said, "I have a dream."
I'll ask you about that in a minute. But I mean, although Donald Trump has been trying to reach out to the black community, it's not really working, is it? I mean, his support is 4%. I mean, it's really very, very low indeed. And although he's been telling them that they're not faring very well under Barack Obama and would fare worse under Hillary Clinton, his message just isn't getting through to them.
Well, that's not really true at all. Again, as I said, I'm here on the ground. I'm here in South Carolina. It's a very, this state itself has a strong history of racial tension and racial divide in this country. We have come a long way here in the great state of South Carolina, and I love my state, but I know what real racism is and what real tension is, and I can tell you for a fact, even though the polls don't suggest it, and we're not at 4%, we're at 8-9%, and that's coming a long way from 1% that we were at. Now we're at 8% to 9%, and it's progressively growing.
But they just basically think that he's
for the
racist.
African American support of Donald Trump. What? No. What I said was I know what real racism is, and it's not Donald Trump. I know what the real face of racism is, and it is most definitely not Donald Trump or the Republican Party. Right now, African Americans are tired of being used and pandered after. Donald Trump didn't pander after African Americans. This growing support of the African American community for Donald Trump is coming at the result of the failed policies of the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton. We all know in the African American community, even though we love Barack Obama as the first black president of the United States, we embrace him as a human being, and he has been a somewhat of a champion for black Americans, but yet we are more racially divided than ever before.
And why is that?
Food stamps have went up.
Why is that?
Welfare has went up. Again, look at the police brutality. That's the division within the police brutality. We're more racially divided than ever before with a sitting black president, and it has nothing to do with Donald Trump. This is why I'm gonna tell you one of the reasons why is because the Democratic Party, they know for the last 50 years, black people here in America have been voting for the Democrat Party.
But why?
And the Democrats
forgive
know
me for
that they
interrupting.
own that voter block.
But beyond party politics, why do you think this racism persists? Why do you think the racial divide is now stronger than it was 8 years ago?
Because, again, when you look at the failed policies of the Democrat Party, you will see that the net worth of a black family is the lowest, is less than $8,000 a year. In America. When you look at the net worth of a white family, it's right about $93,000 a year. The welfare has grown up by 48%. Food stamps have grown up. Ownership with house ownership within the African American community has dropped down. We're still at the back of the bus, and it is not because of Donald Trump, but it's because of the failed policies of the Democrat Party. And remember this, the Democratic Party controls majority of the urban communities in America. So when you look at Baltimore, when you look at Chicago, and you look at that there were over 500 murders that took place just in this year alone, that is taking place right now. People are dying. The south side of Chicago is infamously called Chirac because there are more people dying in the south side of Chicago than in the war in Iraq right now. This is an American tragedy, and it is only till we stop looking at the color of our skin and really start looking at the content of our character that Dr. King spoke of. This is going to be a racial divide war that's coming, and it's bad for America.
But one final brief question, if I may, Pastor Burns. What do you think a white billionaire from the Upper East Side of New York will do for your community, for your black community, in places like South Carolina?
Well, I think the first thing that Donald Trump is doing is he has not pandered after a particular race. That's part of the problem. Donald Trump is not creating specific, color-specific issues that are just creating a lipstick mask that he cares for black people. No, Donald Trump is dealing with the issues that can bring real change to our problems. Hillary Clinton has tap danced, pandered, has sung Kumbaya, go to the black churches, done all the things, NAACP, do all these things to garner the black vote, but yet no real policies that's bringing real change. Donald Trump is not doing that. He's talking about jobs. We need income. You know that 48% of African Americans are unemployed.
We've got to leave it there, I'm afraid, Pastor Burns.
So we got to have jobs.
We've run out of time, Pastor Burns. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot. John.
Coming up in the programme, we'll be hearing from the first American Muslim to wear a hijab whilst competing in the Olympics, Ibtihaj Muhammad. He's a fencing champion fighting negative stereotypes and misconceptions about Muslims.
This felt like a win, not just for myself and for my family, but for the Muslim community. This felt like a win for you know, African Americans. This felt like a win for women. This just felt so much bigger than me from the very beginning.
Human rights in Saudi Arabia are not short of criticism, but the UK's police college has been training Saudi police officers since 2009. The British government argues this will contribute towards human rights reform. But Channel 4 News has learnt basic checks on how these policing techniques are being deployed simply are not being carried out, calling into question whether the training is making any difference at all. Fatima Manji has this report.
The country that gave the world the very first modern professional police force. With all this history and experience, British policing is seen as such a gold standard, it can sell training to police forces in other countries. Among them, controversially, Saudi Arabia. British police have been training Saudi officers since 2009. And the British government argues this will contribute towards reform. But Channel 4 News has learnt basic checks on how these policing techniques are being deployed aren't being carried out. In a document from the College of Policing, it admits there is a tension in reconciling the difficulties of working with countries whose standards of human rights may be at odds with our own. It says it monitors progress using the Kirkpatrick model, a 4-step evaluation. But the college concedes it's powerless to investigate Saudi police behaviour and the training results, unless asked to do so by the customer. Customer is the key word, because one of the only ways that the College of Policing can evaluate its training of Saudi police officers is by asking them to fill out a feedback form with questions such as, how satisfied were you with this course, and was it too short or too long? And yet the Foreign Office says it maintains its relationship with Saudi Arabia to help bring about human rights changes in the country.
It appears to be a facade, and that human rights aren't the focus of the training. It's pretty shocking to consider that the College of Police might be improving the skills of police officers who are then going to go on to arrest people who are being prosecuted for peaceful protest in a repressive regime.
Among them Dawood al-Mahroun, Ali Nimr and Abdullah al-Zahar, accused of political protest, arrested as teens and allegedly tortured. They now face death. Ali's father spoke to us earlier today.
He's waiting for his name to be called out any second now, to be taken to the execution square, where his execution will be performed.
Tonight, the College of Policing told Channel 4 News its decisions on international training are taken by a board which includes the Foreign and Home Office. It considers human rights issues and assesses work against British values and interests.
Fatima Manji reporting while joining us from Dorsington in Warwickshire is the Conservative MP and member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Nadim Zahawi. Mr Zahawi, it's rather extraordinary that Britain, wishing to try to improve the human rights record in Saudi Arabia, has no mechanism for determining whether the police assistance that we're giving is achieving that.
Well, our ambassador in Saudi Arabia, Simon Collis, I witnessed him when he was ambassador in the past in Syria, be robust with those governments when there are human rights violations. And in other countries, in Egypt, our ambassador there does the same thing. They are fearless when they actually hold those countries' leadership to account when there are human rights violations. Now, those countries then begin to ask us for help. They say, look, come and train our police force. Our police force is not as experienced or as disciplined as your own. Please help us. So when they ask for help, is it right that we should help them, or should we just step away and keep criticizing them without offering them any help? We have the best police force in the world. I think it's right that we offer that help. Of course, it's also right to be critical when there are human rights violations. As far as the course is concerned, there's obviously a questionnaire at the end of it, but more importantly, our ambassadors and our ministers, when they visit these countries, are briefed by our ambassadors, and we are robust when we hold these countries to account. Saudi's nowhere near being perfect, John. You know that, and that's going to be your next question, I'm sure.
No, my next question is in fact going to be...
Is it better to help them or
as
not?
you've given me the opportunity to come in there, my next question is to ask you what you think we're doing in improving policing. Do you imagine it is in any way reducing the number of beheadings, stonings, crucifixions, things which are absolutely forbidden in our country and which we would never support? Are we really training police to make these kinds of activities still more effective?
Well, and we condemn the death sentence, and you're quite right. In our country, we would never, ever support them. We would never, ever condone them. But at the same time, my experience on the Foreign Affairs Committee is our ambassadors and our ministers raise human rights violations in countries like Saudi Arabia or Egypt, where the police have been involved. There's an example of terrible kettling at a football match in Egypt, when then the leadership of those countries say, look, we understand why you raise these things, but come and help us, come and train our police force. Is that such a bad thing? I don't think so. I think that's the right attitude to take.
In no way are we sending police training to Saudi Arabia in order to reduce beheadings, executions, beatings, and all the other things which happen to people when they're taken into custody.
Well, the Saudis have the death sentence as part of their constitution, part of their way they want to govern themselves.
Well, they also have stonings. Are you happy to have
we do not
stonings?
choose for ourselves. No, of course not. But I'd rather see police forces anywhere in the world, not just in Saudi or Egypt or other parts of the world in Asia, be as disciplined and as good as our police force. That can only be good for their society. When there are then violations, it is only right that our ambassadors, our ministers will take those up with their government and say that's a violation. But it must be better, John. It must be better that their police are trained like a British police force.
Last question. We closed our operation in helping them to run prisons in Saudi Arabia because we were not satisfied that there was a respect for human rights. Should we not be doing the same thing with the police force?
I think that policing is very different to running prisons, and having well-trained police men in Saudi Arabia, trained by the best British bobbies that we can actually put out there to train those forces in Saudi, in Egypt, in countries in Asia, it can only be good for the world and for those societies. It cannot do any harm, and actually it's the right thing to do. When we are so critical of their violations, we should also then offer the hand of training and ability to share experiences, how to do it well.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Now then, Mary Berry will step down as a judge on the Great British Bake Off when it comes to Channel 4. The presenter bid farewell to Soggy Bottoms and said that her decision to stay with the BBC is out of loyalty to the broadcaster that gave the show its start. It comes a week after hosts Mel and Sue announced they would not be making the move to Channel 4. Mary Berry's fellow judge Paul Hollywood has confirmed that he has signed a new 3-series deal with the show. Our business correspondent Helia Ibrahimi has this report.
It's as English as afternoon tea cakes, and it's heading to a new home, but it will have to do it without the grand dame of baking, Mary Berry.
You're making 2 separate doughs. You're making double work for yourself.
It may have made her a household name, but in a statement, Berry told the nation,
"My decision to stay with the BBC is out of loyalty to them, as they have nurtured me and the show. I'm just sad for the audience who may not be ready for change."
She signed off.
Farewell to Soggy Bottoms.
Berry's break from the show adds to the controversy surrounding the deal that's seen Channel 4 swoop in and buy the rights for the Great British Bake Off.
They're underdone.
Love Productions, my understanding is, could not guarantee Mary. They didn't expect Sue and Mel to walk quite as quickly as they did. So now we're at Channel 4. They've got a fantastic underlying format, no question about it, but they've got a tent and they've got Paul. It's not just a BBC show, any old BBC show. It's a quintessentially BBC show. This has got White Cliffs of Dover, Second World War, nostalgia running through it like Brighton in a stick of rock. It's Middle England, if you like.
Why is that a problem, though?
It's a problem for Channel 4 because Channel 4 was set up formally to cater for needs and interests not served elsewhere.
But not everyone agrees with this theory.
I think Channel 4 is very much a channel, as it were, for the British people. It is a very distinctive remit, serving minority groups and all kinds of interests and so on that different sections of the public have. And of course, you need a mixture of that, very precisely sort of targeted at special groups and more popular programming. The Bake Off is about a competition format, a number of judges, presenters, and 12 contestants, and a lot of this type of format depends upon people linking and identifying with the contestants. So it's a different kind of risk. So I wouldn't bet against them being able to come up with another good team.
At its peak, Bake Off's audience exceeded 14 million. Even if it fell to a third of that on 4, analysts say the show could still attract £50 million of ad revenues, with sponsorship and commercial deals inflating this further to £25 million. That would match the reported annual cost of the show. In a statement, Channel 4 said it
has secured a much-loved show free to air for British audiences. We are delighted that Poor Hollywood will be staying with the show when it moves. We have always operated a cross-funding model where more commercially successful programming helps subsidise the delivery of our public service remit.
The Bake Off drama can now add big money and politics to its list of ingredients. But for viewers watching at home, it will still just be the cakes that count.
That is delicious.
Thank you.
Helia Ebrahimi reporting. Well, let's go straight back to the US, where with weeks to go until the election, the issue of race has exploded once again. In North Carolina, the fatal police shooting of a black man sparked a second night of violent demonstrations. Now a state of emergency has been declared. We can talk to NBC reporter Sarah Rosario, who's in Charlotte. Sarah Rosario, thanks for coming on the programme. Now, it looks very calm behind you at the moment, but is that the way it's going to be for the rest of the day, or can we expect more demonstrations tonight?
Well, Matt, local officials here are definitely expecting things to get a little bit more violence tonight, as they were for the past 2 nights. The city is now calling for some calm after 2 nights of violence. This comes as the state's top prosecutor is now asking the State Bureau of Investigation to take a deeper look into the shooting death of 43-year-old Keith Scott. You may remember he was killed by police on Tuesday. The police chief told us this afternoon he has no plans of releasing any video of that shooting to the public, which is what is getting many people upset around here. It's why several people are protesting. They say that they want proof of what happened, because protesters and police have 2 different sides of the story, or 2 different viewpoints of what happened as to what led up to the shooting of Keith Scott. Matt?
And why do you think, Sarah, the police has refused so far to release this tape? I mean, what's your opinion here? Not as someone who's partisan, but as a reporter. What might be the truth behind that?
So the police chief says that he just doesn't think that it's necessary for the public to see the shooting death of Keith Scott. He says that it goes against the protocol. The only people he is willing to show that video to are the State Bureau of Investigation, who are going to take a deeper look into this case, and also the family of Keith Scott. Charlotte's mayor has asked to take a look at that tape as well, and she says that she wants to look at it with community leaders, but we haven't been told if she's actually seen the tape. The police chief said that he did see the tape, and he says that it does not definitively show that Keith Scott pointed his gun at officers. He says all it shows is that Keith Scott did have a gun, and he claims that officers told Scott several times, put down your weapon, and they told him loud and clear several times, put down your weapon, and each time we're told he did not listen to cops, which is why police officers over here say they feel justified in shooting Scott.
Finally, Sarah, I mean, let's zoom out a little bit. These events, these police shootings seem to be happening over and over again, despite the demonstrations, despite the outrage coming from the White House, despite the outrage coming from lawmakers. Why do you think it keeps getting worse and doesn't get better?
So that's what many people are questioning here. They want to know, how does this keep on happening? This is why several people in this community, especially people in the black community, feel like they are being targeted over and over and over again, and nothing's being done about it. They feel like police officers are taking advantage of a type of community, which is why some civil activists here have said that they're going to be boycotting businesses here in Charlotte. They're holding protests saying Black Lives Matter, and they feel like if local officials don't feel like Black Lives Matter, then why should their money matter? So if they're opposing an economic boycott here in Charlotte, some people in the black community here, to just boycott the economy, hoping that it'll make a statement and prove to people that they do matter here in this community.
It does sound as if we're back in the 60s on some aspects. Thank you very much, Sarah Rosario. John.
Hundreds are feared dead after a boat carrying 450 refugees capsized off the coast of Egypt. The authorities have rescued 163 people and recovered over 40 bodies. A search operation continues for the rest. The tragedy comes after the EU's border agency warned of growing numbers of migrants turning to Egypt as a departure point to get to Europe. Diana Magnig has this report.
They lie cuffed to their beds, a curious kind of care for people who've just spent hours in the Mediterranean Sea. Migrants from Eritrea, Sudan, Syria, Egypt, helpless as their loved ones drowned.
The boat started laying on its side and then flipped at once. Those who went to the bottom never came up. No way out.
I don't know where my wife and son are. Only I survived. I wish I were with them. I will feel guilty for the rest of my life.
It was fishermen who did the rescuing from a boat which carried 600 migrants but was meant for far fewer. Just 163 rescued so far as relatives wait and grieve and rage against the greed of the traffickers who should never have taken so many, and against the authorities they feel didn't act fast enough.
The country we live in looks on these people like dogs, not human beings. If they had treated them like humans, the Navy would have been informed, a boat would have gone out to get them, and not so many would have died.
Some of the survivors were initially taken into custody, but they've been released now, the authorities say. Their hopes of a better life in Europe crushed.
If I'm making only 65 Egyptian pounds a day, how am I going to live? And I hear that so-and-so has travelled and he got millions and came back and built a nice house. So I have to do as so-and-so does.
The central Mediterranean route to Europe is by far the most deadly, with 2,700 of the 3,000 dead or missing this year lost along this route. The vast majority of migrants still set sail from Libya, but now more and more are leaving from Egypt. 8,000 in the first 6 months of this year, compared with 5,000 for the same period last. And that's despite the fact that the journey's far longer. And where there's demand, there's always supply.
The traffickers are all known to the police around here by their names, and they're taking monthly payments from them. This is shameful.
4 crew members are now in detention. Authorities say they're investigating. But it's small comfort for those who grieve. Their relatives, like so many, the casualties of criminal traffickers and cruel seas.
Diana Magna reporting. Now here, Southern Railway staff are to stage 14 days of industrial action in the long-running dispute over the role of train conductors. The RMT union says that the walkout will be held in 5 separate blocks from next month. The escalation in strike action will bring further travel chaos for many hundreds of thousands of passengers who have faced months of delays and cancellations. The RMT says it had no alternative because of Southern's blatant disregard for safety. The company that runs Southern trains said the action was shameful. After the break, we speak to the first American Muslim to wear a hijab whilst competing in the Olympics. Ibtihaj Mohammed is a fencing champion and in Rio won a bronze medal. She was named among Time magazine's 100 most influential people of 2016. She tells us about how she's broken the mold. Attitudes to Islam in America are under greater scrutiny than ever during this fraught presidential election cycle. Now a sportswoman is fighting negative stereotypes and misconceptions about Muslims. Ibtihaj Mohammed is a fencing champion and in Rio became the first American Olympian to compete whilst wearing the hijab, winning a bronze medal in the process. But she's used to breaking the mold, as she was already the first Muslim woman from the US to compete for a national team. After being picked for the Rio squad, she was named amongst Time magazine's 100 most influential people of 2016. Born in New Jersey, the 30-year-old remembers the lack of role models as she grew up. Determined to change things, she is now an ambassador for a State Department initiative to empower women and girls through sport. When I spoke to her earlier this week, I asked her who she felt she'd won her medal for.
Ever since I qualified for this Olympic Games back in February, I've always said that this moment has felt bigger than me. We are in such a tough, political climate, especially for the Muslim community. And this felt like a win, not just for myself and for my family, but for the Muslim community. This felt like a win for, you know, African Americans. This felt like a win for women. This just felt so much bigger than me from the very beginning.
You know, people will be very intrigued that a young Muslim girl, I think you were 13 possibly when you took up fencing, you know, decided that fencing was for her. Why did you choose fencing?
I tried so many different sports growing up, from tennis to softball. I ran track, and in each of those, my parents always had to alter the uniform for me as a Muslim kid by adding sleeves or adding long pants. And at, you know, 13, my mom and I happened to be driving past a local high school, and we saw fencers, you know, from the road inside the school. They, you know, were fully covered. They had on these long fencing jackets, they had on these pants, and they had on these masks. And at the time, we weren't familiar with the sport, but my mom knew that it was something she wanted me to try.
Ebtihaj, Donald Trump has talked about building a wall to keep out Mexicans. And most particularly, he said that Muslims should not be coming to America. What do you make of these comments?
You know, I'm sure that even my presence as a member of Team USA, me standing out there before even I you know, took the fencing strip, I'm sure I challenged a lot of preconceived notions that people, you know, have had and, you know, have had for a long time. So I feel like to be in this position, I'm hoping that just, again, my presence as a member of Team USA challenges those misconceptions that people have about the Muslim community, about, you know, women who wear the hijab, and just fighting these stereotypes that people have and breaking them down.
Have you felt discomforted by some of Donald Trump's thoughts about black people and Muslims in particular?
I think any, you know, person of sound mind is made uncomfortable by a lot of the comments that we hear during this presidential election. It is the first time in my, you know, 30 years of existence I've heard publicly, you know, people make bigoted remarks and remarks that, you know, inspire fear and hate and violence. And I'm hoping that it doesn't become a norm in our society. I want us as a country to fight it and to say that this is, you know, this isn't American, this isn't who we are, and this isn't what we'll stand for.
And where does America's first Olympic medal-winning Muslim woman go from here? The next Olympics?
You know, I don't know. I don't know what happens next. I know that I want to use my platform for change, and whether that is on the fencing strip or off, I want to continue to inspire that younger me. I want to continue to inspire, you know, young girls and boys out there who have ever been told that there are things that they shouldn't do, because I know that that was something I experienced as a kid. And I want to hopefully be a source of inspiration to show them that with hard work and perseverance, they can do and be anyone they want.
Ebtihaj Mohammed, thank you very much indeed for talking to us, and congratulations again.
Thank you so much, Sean. Great talking to you.
And before we go, some breaking news now. The internet giant Yahoo has confirmed that information relating to at least 500 million user accounts was stolen by what it calls a state-sponsored actor in 2014. And a quick reminder of tonight's main news: Aleppo is ablaze amid some of the heaviest bombing in months, as Russia and America sit down again to try to forge a new ceasefire.
And that is Channel 4 News. Good evening.
Good evening.